Hi. It's so nice to meet all of you for the first time. Thank you so much for having me again, and I hope Shelly feels better soon. Shout out to Shelly, she's amazing. So, thank you so much for being here with me. I am so excited to talk to you about a little hardware project I did a few years ago that inspired me, and I hope to inspire you today to also mess around with hardware. So, this one's going to be a little bit lively, so just to give you a heads up, there is no signal, one sec. There is going to be a little bit of music in this presentation, so be warned. It's going to get a little bit loud. So can I check with the audience? Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite kinds of video games, which is music video games. So can I ask, show of hands, has anyone ever played Just Dance? Wow, a good amount of y'all. Cool, cool. Something a little bit more recent maybe. Has any of y'all ever played Beat Saber? Can I double check? Yeah, cool. I started playing it recently. It's super fun and I'm super bad at it. But I want to talk to you today about one of my favorite music video games, something a little bit older. It's called Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR for short. And I want to check, has anyone ever played that? I see one pair of oh, good. I love this game. Let me explain to you a little bit how it works. You see, this GIF right here is showing us this gentleman dancing on a mat, which has 4 buttons, up, down, left, and right. And you're pressing the buttons as they come up on the screen to the beat of the music. To the beat? No, to the rhythm of the song. And I've been playing this game for many years, so many in fact, that the one I played was the original on the PlayStation 1. That's the 90s, y'all. And just like I love this game so much, I don't know if you've heard the music. I would love to show you the music because it is just a snapshot of that time. I'm just going to put up my audio here for a sec. Just listen with me. I'm so sorry. I have no idea why the music is chugging like that. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay, sorry. I don't want to just play music for y'all all day. It's a lot of fun. So I introduced my wife to Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR as I'm going to call it from here on out, many years ago, and we wanted to play it, but I didn't have my PlayStation anymore, so we got an open source version of Dance Dance of DDR called, oh, hold on, just a tiny technical issue, there we go, called Stepmania. Anyone ever heard of Stepmania? Let me see some hands. Yes, oh, I see a fan. We got to talk later. Cool, yeah, so Stepmania, open source, runs on your PC, super, super fun. And so then we needed to get a controller, we needed to get the mat. And these are made of foam, right? So the buttons are there, you press, you dance, you have a good time. But the problem with these mats, they're not expensive. They're like 30 euros or something, or at least at the time of writing this presentation. And the thing about them is that the contacts on the foam would wear out over time. And so they wouldn't detect your presses as well anymore, and you start seeing this screen a lot. So we thought, okay, we really like this game, we want to make a hobby of it, so we went to look at the metal mats. These have proper buttons, they're proper good stuff. But I don't know if you can see the price. This is pretty expensive, but if you actually take a look, it's reduced from $900. I don't have that kind of money. I don't even have $300 to spend on a game controller. But whatever, I kind of forgot the idea and moved on with my life. But then at one point, I was at the Maker Faire in Vienna. Do they have Maker Faire here? I don't know why I'm asking and then looking. Have y'all heard of Maker Faire? Oh, it's super fun. What they do is they have like a little exposition where you can come and buy stuff from different manufacturers in the spirit of hacking on hardware. And I'm not a hardware programmer myself, but I definitely am an enthusiast. But I ran into some lovely folks from a company called Bear Conductive. and they had this electronic paint. This is called conductive paint, and it's super cool because what it does is it carries a charge. I saw a demo where they painted between a battery and a light bulb, and the light bulb was turned on, which is cool, but it gets cooler than that because as you can see on this picture, not only is it conductive, it's also capacitative. What a fancy word. What that means is that when you press it, your electricity of your body carries a charge, and then you can activate stuff on, say, a little piece of hardware here. And so this was playing like a piano. So I took a look at this, and I started thinking, interesting. I looked into their stuff. Obviously, I bought the paint right away. I was like, this is so cool. I took it home, and I took a look at their resources, and they had a JavaScript module that I could program, and it looked like something I could copy-paste. I love copy-pasting. So then I thought, I could make... I love this GIF. I'm sorry, I'm going to let it play. I could make something with this. So then I took a look at StepMania, and well, I can customize the controls. What if I had a programmable keyboard that I could turn into a dance mat? So my wife and I took the module, that's the hat of the Raspberry Pi with the paint, a Raspberry Pi itself, some of the paint, a yoga mat, and some Node.js, and started tinkering. Now, if you're not familiar, Raspberry Pi is a tiny computer about the size of a credit card. This one's even smaller. It's like the size of a chocolate bar. And it runs on Linux. I've used Linux before. I can work with this. And guess what? We did. So, folks, I give you the dance-mat.js. At this point, I would usually introduce myself, but I think some of y'all already know me. Hi again, I'm Carmen. I do lots of community stuff. Now, as I said before, this is my first ever hardware project. And I'm going to be honest, I went in head first. This was definitely a learning experience for me. But okay, here was the plan. We had our mat with our yoga mat and our Raspberry Pi and our paint. We're going to plug it into a computer, and the computer's going to be like, cool, this is a keyboard. I can work with this. Then I took some of the code, which has a callback for when data is detected from one of the electrodes on the Raspberry Pi itself. And then I put myself a little comment there. Send data to PC. Easy peasy. Or so I thought. What about the connection, though? I thought, hey, it's a Raspberry Pi. It's got Bluetooth. I can just send the data via Bluetooth. Has anybody ever programmed Bluetooth before? Can I see a show of hands? I see one person. Look, I'm going to be honest. I don't recommend it. I had a really bad time programming Bluetooth. So instead, I thought, well, why not just plug it in via USB? Cool. I plugged the Raspberry Pi into the USB, and to much of my surprise, turns out a computer just doesn't just recognize a Raspberry Pi as a keyboard. And y'all might be thinking, Carmen, what made you think that you could just plug in a Raspberry Pi into a computer and expect it to think it's a keyboard? I will remind you that this is my first ever hardware project. But it turns out it is possible. Step number 1, I found a blog post. Fantastic. What I'm going to do is take my Raspberry Pi and turn it into a gadget. It's a cool term for it. Using the config file system on Linux. Quick reminder, I'm not a hardware person. But there are 2 steps to this process. The first one was to enable the Raspberry Pi OTG mode, which is USB on the go. More on that in a second. And then I needed to add a boot script to enable the keyboard HID device, which is short for human interface device. Oh, I just did an ATM machine thing, didn't I? You know, ATM machine, human interface device. Anyway, we're going to do that and configure it so that my computer will recognize the Raspberry Pi as a keyboard. So a quick note on OTG, or on the go. You see how the Raspberry Pi has two USB slots there, USB mini slots, over on the right-hand side. The one on the far right is for power. The one on the left is for data. But if you enable OTG, when you plug it in to the data slot, then the computer will not only recognize it as a device, but also give it power, hence the term on the go. And I just love a blog post that just gives me commands that I can copy paste into Linux. Apparently these three things enabled OTG mode. Cool. Now I can plug it in and it'll turn on and allow me to send data. But then there's a script to enable keyboard HID. Sounds complicated. But again, this tutorial was super helpful. It's my favorite kind of tutorial because it gave me a big old thing to copy paste that I have no idea what it does. The important part is the part that I have marked in green, where I can specify the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is me, and the product itself, which is the DDR dance mat. Now, this information is the stuff you see when you plug it in and it says, like, now installing the DDR dance mat from the Carmen Huidobro company. So, I copy-pasted it, set up the script, set it up to run on boot, and I plugged the Raspberry Pi via USB into my computer. And folks, the sound I heard made me so happy. I want to share with you the sound I heard, if you don't mind bearing with me. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Listen. Let me try that again. Folks, that sound was beautiful to hear. It meant that my computer had detected the Raspberry Pi as a keyboard. So cool. This config.fs, or file system, gets mounted virtually and automatically when I run my Raspberry Pi and runs those scripts for me. It turns out there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with the Raspberry Pi OS, which is a distribution of Linux. Step one done. Now it's time to figure out how to send data over USB. So naturally, I went to the USB human interface devices information and I download a 300 megabyte PDF file. And I think I read like one page and I made this sound. You know, like basset hounds, right? The big dogs? It kind of went like that, kind of woof. I could not figure out how to interpret the PDF and how to find the data, but that's okay. Turns out that hacker spaces and communities have loads of people who know more than I do, and there's also resources on GitHub for finding how to send a keystroke. It's a good reminder that asking for help at any point in your career is a very good thing and a skill. So, what I took away from all of these conversations and readings is that a keystroke via USB is a byte array of 8 hexadecimal keys. The first 2 are for modifiers, Control, Alt, Shift, Command, Option, etc., etc. And the remaining 6 are for the keys themselves. And they look like this. You can see that 4 hexadecimal corresponds to A, 5 corresponds to B, C, D, 6, etc., etc. I just copy-pasted a bunch of them. And I put in player 1 left, player 1 right, player 1 up, and player 1 down. These are the data that I'm going to be sending to correspond to each key press. And the keen-eyed among you notice the player 1. That's right. Hey, I have lots of buttons. I can have a player 2. I am so excited. So, okay. I started working on my callback. I will write a function called parse pressed keys from the data itself. Now remember, this is when one of the electrodes on the Raspberry Pi is touched. Just to show you another photo, this is the device that gets attached to the Raspberry Pi and gets data from the paint itself, gets the charge. This is called a hat, because it sits like a hat on the Raspberry Pi. It's an acronym for something, and I don't remember what it is. Doesn't matter. So, what I'm going to do is check for each electrode, part of an array of the data, and if it's pressed, then I will add to my array that key itself. So for the first one, I put in player 1 left. For the second one, I put player 1 right, up, down, etc., etc. Cool, and then I'll return those pressed keys, and that'll give me a nice array. The next thing to do is to actually create a keystroke of 8 keys from those keys themselves. So that's what I did here. First, I just sort of like created those 2 modifiers, then I put in each of the keys, and then I very, very lazily just like made sure it was 8 characters long. Cool. So we have a keystroke, which is an array of 8 hexadecimal numbers. Now, if I start up the script on my Raspberry Pi, and I would touch the electrodes, I could see that it was console logging those byte arrays themselves. Not byte arrays, keystroke arrays. Because then we need to take those numbers and turn them into a byte array. I have no idea what a byte array is, so I went on the internet. And it turns out, MDN is such a good resource, y'all. It turns out there's a function called uint8-bit array that would turn it into what I needed. Fantastic. So I had my little buffer of data that I was ready to send over USB to my computer. So now all I had to do was send the keystroke via USB. Help. Turns out, hold on a second, this is Linux. Everything is a file. If you're not familiar with file descriptors, in Unix and Linux systems, everything I interact with is a file. USB devices, other computers in the network, files themselves, and it turns out that when I copy-pasted that script, it created a file I could communicate with. /dev/hid, I recognize the hid there. G0, no idea. Doesn't matter. So I ran a command, and I'm on my Raspberry Pi. I ran a command that said, just sort of like, write to this file saying blah, 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 I am a keystroke. It's obviously really bad data, but it worked. So now I just needed to do this in my Node.js script. No idea how to do that. But, as always, there's an NPM package for that. So, I found an NPM package called Linux device, which is amazing because it just says like, hey, open up this file and let me just send data to it. So all I had to do now, device.write, and then the 8-bit array. Fantastic. Obviously, we're good citizens, and we need to close that file, otherwise stuff gets messy when we just unplug the Raspberry Pi. So when the process ends, we close that connection to the file. All said and done, all well and good. Let's go back to the terminal and run node dance-mat.js, plugged into my computer. So what did we do? We plugged in the Raspberry Pi to the computer, and we opened up a text editor. Folks, you have no idea how exciting it is to see these letters appear on the text editor. I was typing with a Raspberry Pi onto a computer in the worst way possible. But it worked. We were very excited. So now, it's time to paint. So, we took our yoga mat, we painted some arrows. You remember how I said player 1? There's player 2. Now we had 2 players. We painted the set of arrows, we painted a start button and a select button. Then we had to cut the yoga mat in half because it turns out that having 2 people dancing this close to each other is kind of dangerous. So we split it up. Can you see we made little cables out of the paint? It was super good. Then we started up Stepmania. Then we plugged in our Raspberry Pi. We set it up with the connections, and did it work? Yes. Were we good at it? Kinda. Turns out that we still have to be good at the game. But hey, we were getting a score of D. That's pretty good. It worked. So the question now is, are we set for life? Kinda. As we developed this project, we did start running into some questions that we put on a list of like, our if we could do it all over again list. And I showed this project to some friends, and like the first question I got was, but Carmen, why didn't you use an Arduino? And I said, hey, that's a great question. I have a question for you. What's an Arduino? If you're not familiar, an Arduino is a tiny microcontroller that allows you to interact with computers using low-level programming that doesn't require you to do some weird stuff with Linux. Lesson learned. It also turns out that using a yoga mat, super good for storage. You can roll it up. But what happens to paint when you roll it up? It cracks. So next time we were going to use like a smoother, harder surface. Also, using paint as cables was not a good idea. Because the same thing, that you increase the surface area for error. So what we ended up doing was sort of like, I couldn't solder, my wife soldered a bunch of cables onto it. But you know what? It doesn't matter. This was not the best way to go about this project, but the important thing is I leveraged my skills as a web developer, and we learned a bunch of stuff, and we had a good time doing it. You don't believe me? Here's a photo of us looking so happy. That photo has nothing to do with the project itself. I just thought we looked cute there. Anyway, so the project is done. The question is, can I demo it to you today? And I'm so sorry to say that I don't have my demo unit here because I didn't know that I'd be doing this presentation. But I'd love to show you what it looks like. So, we painted some arrows. There's a Raspberry Pi. I can never find my sticky tape at home, but I always have washi tape lying around. So we washi taped the Raspberry Pi onto this demo unit. We used our cables. Now this was the first time I demoed this a couple years ago, and it ended in disaster. Because what happened was, it turns out if you use washi tape, it's not going to stick really well. So it moved, and then I couldn't get the connections to work anymore. So I tried painting it over, and then I connected two cables together, and then I tried using water to clean it, and then it just kept getting worse and worse. Anyway, here's the second version. It's much better. The cat is the start button. How cute is that? And this is the one I usually use for presentations, and you can see we use crocodile clips. It works really, really well. And you might be wondering, ooh, what kind of cool surface is this, Carmen? What is it? Let me just flip it for us real quick. It's a pizza box. But hey, it works. So why am I telling you this? I think it's so important to play around with your skills and leverage and be in a place where you're like taking a little step outside of your comfort zone. Hardware hacking looks like it can be super scary, and yes, there is a margin for error. That means you could break hardware, but you can always, resources allowing, replace parts that don't work, and be kind to yourself and know that you're learning. You have those existing skills. I knew Linux, I knew JavaScript, and it worked. I think this emphasis on playing around with your knowledge and letting yourself explore, leveraging the community, and just remembering how many NPM packages there are. I don't know. I thought this was really fun, and I wanted to share with you today. So next time you're thinking, can I do it? Give it a try. All right, folks, that was me. So if you want to check out my slides, it's carmenh.dev/dance-mat-js.pdf. And once again, thank you for having me.